Ethan placed the coffee cup in front of me, his fingers lingering on the rim for just a second too long. Steam curled upward, carrying a scent that made my stomach tighten, bitter, almost metallic. Something was off. "I made this just for you, Evelyn. Go on, taste it." His voice was smooth, almost too smooth, carefully measured like a rehearsed performance. I looked up, meeting the eyes of the man I had been married to for 3 years. His smile was warm, affectionate even. But that was the problem. It was too perfect. Too deliberate. Across the table, Victoria, my sister-in-law, stirred her coffee with lazy indifference. She looked effortlessly elegant, as always, in a tailored silk blouse, her dark hair swept into an immaculate bun. But it was her eyes that unsettled me. Amusement flickered behind them, like she was in on some private joke I wasn't supposed to understand. "Ethan's been practicing different brewing methods lately," she mused, lifting her cup to her lips but not drinking. "Just for you." There it was. The emphasis. For you. A statement wrapped in honey, hiding something far more dangerous beneath. I glanced down at my cup again, the scent creeping into my lungs. It wasn't just coffee. There was something else. Something foreign. The last time I had a drink at Victoria's house, I ended up in urgent care for the night. A mysterious allergic reaction, they called it. The same way they had called the other incidents food poisoning, a bad stomach virus, an unfortunate coincidence. Except coincidences didn't happen this often. I forced a smile, lifting the cup just enough to bring it near my lips. Ethan and Victoria both watched me. Waiting. I didn't take a sip. Instead, I turned my wrist slightly, pretending to examine the coffee as I studied them through the rising steam. Ethan looked calm. Too calm. His hands were resting on the table, but his right thumb was tapping rhythmically against the wood, nervous energy betraying the mask he wore. Victoria, on the other hand, was unreadable. Poised, detached, but her fingers remained curled around her untouched cup. Something was wrong. And I wasn't about to be their fool. I let the cup hover near my lips, tilting it just enough to give the illusion that I was about to take a sip. The bitter scent lingered, filling my nostrils, making my stomach twist tighter. They were waiting for me to drink. I lowered the cup with a thoughtful hum. "It smells different." Ethan's smile twitched. "It's a new blend. Something special." Special. I fought the urge to laugh. Special, indeed. "You always get creative with your coffee, don't you?" I mused, swirling the liquid slightly, watching the dark ripples dance along the ceramic edges. Victoria smirked, leaning back in her chair. "He really does. It's admirable how much effort he puts in, especially for you." There it was again. For you. Like a quiet warning dressed as a compliment. I glanced toward the window, my reflection barely visible against the city skyline beyond. The afternoon sunlight glowed against the pristine white marble countertops, the glass dining table perfectly set, everything in Victoria's penthouse was pristine, controlled, just like her. My fingers tightened slightly around the handle of the cup. This wasn't paranoia. This was survival. For the past year, my life had been littered with accidents. Small things, easy to dismiss. A slightly spoiled dish that only made me sick. A drink that tasted off, followed by an unexplained fever. A stomach bug that no one else in the house caught. Each time, Ethan had been there with a soft apology, a warm hand on my back, a reminder that I should be more careful. Then, 2 months ago, I had collapsed after drinking tea at Victoria's house. I spent hours in urgent care, my body racked with tremors and nausea. The doctors never found anything conclusive, but I knew. I knew. I also knew that Victoria had made that tea herself. And she had sat there, across from me, watching with that same amused smirk she wore now. The pieces had been falling into place for months. The hushed conversations that stopped when I entered the room. The lingering glances between Ethan and Victoria. The way his phone lit up with messages at odd hours, messages I wasn't supposed to see. This wasn't just about me. They had been planning something together. And today, they had placed it right in front of me. I exhaled softly, setting the cup down with deliberate care. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my movements smooth, unbothered. If they were watching me, I would watch them too. Then, an idea formed. A test. A simple switch. I reached for my phone, pretending to check a notification. Oh, 1 second. I need to take a quick call for work. I stood up, moving away from the table, stepping around Victoria's seat. As I passed by her, I stumbled, just slightly, knocking the table, making a small commotion. Oh. Sorry about that. I gasped, steadying myself. Victoria's cup wobbled. My hand moved fast, too fast for her to notice. When I straightened up, my coffee was no longer in front of me. It was in front of Victoria. Victoria barely reacted, too absorbed in whatever game she thought she was winning. She adjusted the napkin on her lap, lifting her cup with the same casual elegance she always carried. I forced myself to breathe evenly, to keep my expression neutral as she brought the rim to her lips. Ethan was still watching me, expecting me to return to my seat and drink. But I didn't. I lingered near the window, phone in hand, pretending to scroll while keeping my focus razor-sharp on Victoria. The first sip was small. Barely a taste. She let the coffee sit on her tongue for a moment before swallowing. Then, something changed. It was subtle at first, a flicker of hesitation, her fingers tightening around the porcelain, the barest shift in her expression. My pulse quickened. She set the cup down slowly, blinking twice. A pause. Too long of a pause. Ethan noticed. Something wrong? He tried to keep his tone light, but I heard it, the undercurrent of panic, the realization creeping in. Victoria exhaled sharply, shaking her head as if clearing a fog. No, it's a little strong, that's all. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a thin crack in the polished surface. I turned back toward the table, tilting my head. Oh? You usually like your coffee bold. I moved closer, watching as she lifted the cup again. This time, her hand wasn't as steady. Another sip. Then, a sharp inhale. She pressed a palm against her stomach, her jaw tightening. Ethan sat up straighter. Victoria? His voice dropped, no longer casual. She tried to speak, but a strange sound came out instead, something between a cough and a gasp. Her breath hitched. A tremor ran through her hand as she set the cup down with too much force, some of the liquid sloshing over the side. My heart pounded, but I kept my face calm, unreadable. I wanted her to say it. I needed her to admit it. Something feels off, she muttered, blinking rapidly. She reached for her napkin, dabbing at her lips, but I saw the tremble in her fingers now, the tension in her shoulders. Ethan's chair scraped against the floor as he shot up. Victoria, what's going on? He glanced at me, then at her cup. I watched the exact moment the realization hit him, when he put it all together. Panic settled into his features. His gaze snapped back to me, searching for confirmation, for any sign that I had figured it out. I held his stare, letting the silence stretch between us before speaking. That wasn't my cup, I said softly. His face drained of color. Victoria let out a sharp breath, gripping the edge of the table. Ethan. Her voice was barely above a whisper now, strained, uncertain, but laced with something new, fear. Ethan turned back to her, eyes wide, hands twitching at his sides. That wasn't supposed to be yours, he muttered, almost to himself. But the words hung in the air like a death sentence. The room went still. The only sound was Victoria's unsteady breathing, the faint clink of her spoon against the saucer as her trembling hand knocked against it. The perfect illusion they had crafted was shattering right in front of them. My pulse steadied, my grip tightening around my phone. I had what I needed. Now, it was time to finish this. Ethan lunged toward Victoria, his movements frantic as he crouched beside her chair. Just breathe, okay? You're fine. But she wasn't fine. Her pupils had dilated, her skin was paling by the second, and a thin sheen of sweat formed along her brow. Her fingers dug into the tablecloth, gripping it like an anchor. What did you put in it? Her voice was hoarse, each word a struggle. I stayed where I was, watching it all unfold. Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. He was too busy calculating his next move, too busy realizing that his plan had collapsed right in front of him. I pulled my phone from my pocket and pressed the record button. You should tell her, Ethan, I said, my voice almost gentle. Tell her what was in my cup. The one she just drank. His head snapped up, eyes wild. Evelyn, this isn't what you think. No? I stepped forward, resting my hand on the back of an empty chair. Then explain it to me. Explain why Victoria is having the same symptoms I had 2 months ago, after drinking tea at her house. Or why I ended up in urgent care 3 times this year after sharing meals with you too. My voice hardened. Explain that. Victoria coughed, a choked sound escaping her throat. She clutched her stomach, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. She wasn't trying to mask her fear anymore. Her body was betraying her, just as she had planned for mine to. I watched as the truth settled in, the horror, the betrayal. Her gaze shifted to Ethan, her lips parting. You, she whispered, something breaking in her expression. You told me it wouldn't. He clamped a hand over hers, gripping it tightly. Stop talking, he hissed under his breath. We just need to. I dialed 911. Ethan's head snapped toward me as the call connected. 911, what's your emergency? My sister-in-law appears to be having a severe reaction to something in her coffee, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos unraveling before me. She's conscious, but experiencing tremors and difficulty breathing. We're at 1542 West Monroe, Penthouse 3. Victoria's breathing hitched. Ethan's grip on her tightened, his knuckles turning white. His mind was working, I could see it. He was trying to find an escape route, a way to twist this in his favor. But there wasn't one. Not anymore. Victoria groaned, her body slumping slightly. Ethan, she rasped. Tell me, what was in it? Ethan swallowed hard. His silence was damning. I lifted my phone higher, ensuring the screen was facing him. I'm still recording, I reminded him. So go ahead, explain. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He knew there was nothing to say. Nothing that could undo this. The sirens blared in the distance, growing closer. Help was on the way, but not for him. Not for them. Ethan's world, the careful, calculated life he had built, was crumbling. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to relief. The sirens grew louder, the sharp wail slicing through the suffocating tension in the room. Ethan's face was pale now, beads of sweat forming along his hairline. His grip on Victoria slackened just as her body trembled again, her breathing turning more erratic. She tried to lift a hand toward him, as if seeking reassurance, but he didn't reach back. He was too busy unraveling. I stepped closer, keeping my phone steady. Tell me, Ethan, I said, my voice calm, deliberate. How were you planning to explain this? If I had been the one to drink that coffee instead of her, what was your plan? He turned to me then, something shifting behind his eyes, something darker. For a split second, I saw it. The calculation. The survival instinct kicking in. But before he could piece together whatever lie he was scrambling for, Victoria let out a sharp, pained gasp. You said it, would just make her sick, she choked out, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hand gripped Ethan's sleeve weakly. You said, it wouldn't be traced. My breath caught. There it was. The confession I had been waiting for. Ethan flinched, his head whipping toward her. Victoria, stop talking, he snapped, his voice low but edged with panic. She ignored him, her glazed eyes locking onto mine instead. The tea, she muttered, her words slurred. The breakfast, the last time. It was all him. I felt my stomach drop. I had suspected Victoria had been in on it from the start. But now, as I watched the realization dawn in her eyes, I saw something else. She had been manipulated too. I gripped my phone tighter. And what about this time? I asked softly. Was it him again? Her lips parted, but she never got the chance to answer. The front door burst open. 2 paramedics rushed in, followed closely by a pair of uniformed officers. One of them, a tall woman with sharp eyes, scanned the room quickly before focusing on Victoria's slumped form. "We need space," one of the paramedics instructed, already kneeling beside her. I stepped back, keeping my phone recording. Ethan, however, didn't move. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, his eyes darting toward the officers like a cornered animal. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a clipped tone, turned to me. "You were the caller?" I nodded. "I have everything recorded." She drank from my cup. The coffee, there was something in it. He switched them before I could drink. I jerked my chin toward Ethan. "And she just admitted that he's been drugging me for months." The officer's jaw tightened. His gaze flickered toward Ethan. "Sir, I need you to step away." Ethan moved. Fast. I barely had time to react before he lunged toward me, his hand reaching for my phone. But the officers were faster. One grabbed him by the arm, yanking him backward as he struggled. "Evelyn," he shouted, his voice wild now, desperate. "You don't understand. She was the one who—" He didn't get to finish. The officer forced him down, pinning his arms behind his back as the cuffs clicked into place. Victoria let out a weak laugh, her lips curling into something bitter. "Look at you," she rasped. "You really thought you'd get away with it." Ethan thrashed once more, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But he wasn't looking at Victoria anymore. He was looking at me. And for the first time since this all started, I saw something real in his eyes. Fear. Ethan's struggles grew weaker as the officers secured the cuffs around his wrists. The panic in his eyes was raw now, stripped of the calculated charm he had worn for years. He wasn't in control anymore. He knew it. I knew it. Victoria let out a ragged breath, her body barely holding itself upright as the paramedics worked around her. She was still conscious, but barely. Her fingers twitched slightly on the table, her skin pale and clammy. Despite the fear in her expression, there was something else flickering beneath it, realization. She had never thought she would be the one gasping for breath. I shifted my attention to Ethan. His chest was rising and falling rapidly, his lips slightly parted as if he was still trying to come up with a way out of this. "You really thought I wouldn't notice, didn't you?" I said quietly, stepping closer. "All those times you made excuses. All those nights I was curled up in pain, and you convinced me it was just bad luck." I shook my head, my grip tightening around my phone. "You almost had me believing it." His nostrils flared. "Evelyn, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I held up the phone, the red recording light still blinking. "Victoria might not have realized what you were capable of until it was too late, but I did. I've known for a while." The female officer who had been standing to the side stepped forward then, her expression unreadable. "Ma'am, would you be willing to provide a formal statement?" I exhaled slowly, nodding. "Yes." Ethan jerked in the officer's grip. "She's lying. She set this up." His voice cracked with desperation. "Victoria, tell them." Victoria didn't respond. She was too busy clenching her jaw against another wave of nausea, her body too weak to even glare at him. The paramedics exchanged glances before one of them addressed the officers. "She needs to be transported now. Whatever she ingested, it's spreading fast." Ethan's expression twisted. "You can fix this," he urged her. "Tell them I had nothing to do with it. Tell them it was her." Victoria finally turned her head, her heavy-lidded eyes landing on him. For the first time since she had started feeling the effects of the poisoned coffee, she actually looked at him, really looked at him. And then she laughed. It was weak, barely more than an exhale, but it was filled with something bitter. "Fix this," she murmured, her voice hoarse. "You're the one who promised it wouldn't be traced, Ethan." She blinked sluggishly. "You're the one who said it was just supposed to make her sick." Silence. The officers exchanged glances, their grips on Ethan tightening. There it was. The final nail in his coffin. Victoria's breathing was unsteady, but her lips curled just slightly as she muttered, "You poisoned me." Ethan's face drained of color completely. "Victoria," he whispered, but there was nothing left to say. She let her head tilt back slightly against the chair, her body giving in to exhaustion. The paramedics loaded her onto the stretcher, her eyes fluttering closed. She didn't look at him again. I stepped back, watching as they wheeled her toward the door. The entire room felt smaller, suffocating, but I refused to let the weight of it crush me. One of the officers tapped his radio. "We'll need a forensic team to test the coffee and collect evidence at the scene." He looked at me then. "We'll also need to take your phone as evidence." "The recording?" "I already sent a copy to my lawyer." My voice was steady, firm. Ethan flinched. The officer nodded approvingly. "Smart." Ethan let out a strangled sound. "You're ruining everything." I tilted my head, watching him. "No, Ethan. You did that all on your own." The officers led him toward the door. He thrashed once more, but it was weaker now, useless. He turned his head at the last second, eyes burning with something ugly. "You think this is over?" he hissed. I stared at him, unblinking. "Oh, it is," I said. And then they took him away. The moment the door shut behind them, the silence in the penthouse was deafening. I stood there, inhaling slowly, letting the weight of everything settle. It was over. The months of paranoia, the nights spent wondering if I was imagining things, the careful calculations to uncover the truth, it was all over. I glanced down at the untouched coffee cup still sitting in front of me, its surface now cool, harmless. It could have been me. It was supposed to be me. I exhaled, dragging my fingers through my hair before making my way toward the window. The city stretched before me, golden light spilling between the skyscrapers. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. A soft chime pulled me back to the moment. My phone. I glanced at the screen, a message from my lawyer. "The files are secure. We'll proceed with formal charges." "I assume you're pressing them against both?" I hesitated, just for a second. Victoria had been a willing participant in everything leading up to today. She had manipulated, schemed, played her part in every attempt to destroy me. But in the end, she had been just as disposable to Ethan as I was. I typed my response. Yes. Both. There was no hesitation this time. I turned away from the window, stepping over to the table. My fingers traced the edge of Victoria's abandoned coffee cup before I carefully lifted it and placed it in the sink. I wasn't about to leave behind any evidence that could be twisted into something against me. Not that I needed to worry, the truth was already out. A knock at the door startled me slightly. When I opened it, a uniformed officer was standing there, his expression professional but firm. "Miss Carter, we'll need you to come down to the station for an official statement. This won't take long, but given the severity of the case, the detectives will want to speak with you personally." I nodded. "Of course. Let me grab my coat." As I slipped on my jacket, my gaze flickered once more to the table, to the 2 coffee cups, one empty, one nearly full. The evidence of their downfall. I stepped outside, locking the penthouse behind me. There was still more to be done. Statements to give. Trials to attend. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one being hunted. I was walking away. And I was winning. The ride to the station was quiet. The officer driving didn't speak much, which suited me just fine. I wasn't in the mood for small talk. My mind was already working through what came next, the formal statement, the legal proceedings, the inevitable media storm that would follow once the truth got out. Ethan and Victoria weren't just going to prison. They were about to lose everything. When we arrived, I was escorted into a private room where a detective was already waiting. Detective Mendoza, according to her badge. She was sharp-eyed, mid-40s, and had the air of someone who had seen far too many cases like this. She gestured for me to sit. "Miss Carter, I appreciate you coming in so quickly," she said, flipping open a file. "Let's start with what you know." I leaned back slightly, meeting her gaze head-on. "I know that my husband has been poisoning me for months. I know that my sister-in-law helped him. And I know that today, they plan to do it again, only this time, they made a mistake." Mendoza's brows lifted slightly. "A mistake?" I folded my hands in my lap. Victoria drank the wrong cup. She let out a low whistle, jotting something down. "And you have proof of this?" I pulled out my phone, placing it on the table. Recorded conversation. Video. Messages I forwarded to my lawyer. Medical records from past incidents. Mendoza looked impressed but not surprised. "Smart," she murmured. "Most people in situations like this don't think that far ahead." I let out a dry laugh. "Most people don't expect their own husband to try and kill them." She nodded, flipping through the notes in front of her. "Forensics is already analyzing the coffee. If the toxicology report matches what we suspect, your husband will be facing attempted murder charges. Your sister-in-law as well, depending on her level of involvement." "She was involved," I said firmly. "But Ethan was the mastermind." Mendoza leaned forward slightly. "Why do you think he did it?" I exhaled. "Money. Power. Control." My jaw tightened. Ethan always hated that I was the more successful one. My company was thriving, and his career had stalled. Victoria wanted me out of the way because we worked in the same industry, competing for the same clients. Together, they figured out a solution that worked for both of them. Mendoza clicked her pen, nodding slowly. "But they got greedy. And sloppy." "They underestimated me," I corrected. She studied me for a long moment, then closed the file. "I'll be honest, Miss Carter. Most people in your position wouldn't have made it this far. They would have ignored the signs, given in to fear, or ended up exactly where Ethan wanted them to." I held her gaze, my voice steady. "I don't scare easily." A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "Good. That's going to serve you well in the trial." She stood, extending a hand. "We'll be in touch once the official charges are filed. In the meantime, if you need anything, security, legal support, let us know. Given the nature of this case, you're going to be under a lot of scrutiny." I shook her hand. "I can handle it." And I meant it. As I walked out of the station, stepping into the crisp evening air, I knew one thing for certain: Ethan and Victoria had played their game well. But I had played it better. And now, I was the one walking free. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back, their cameras flashing as Ethan and Victoria were let in, both wearing the same prison-issued jumpsuits. It was a stark contrast to the polished, powerful image they had once cultivated. Ethan looked thinner, his jaw clenched as he avoided my gaze. Victoria, on the other hand, was barely holding herself together. I sat in the front row, my lawyer beside me, hands folded neatly in my lap. I wasn't here to gloat. I was here to watch them fall. The prosecution wasted no time laying out the evidence. "Your Honor, what we have here is a premeditated and calculated attempt at poisoning Mrs. Carter, spanning months." The prosecutor clicked through slides on the overhead screen. "Medical records indicate she was hospitalized 3 separate times under suspicious circumstances, each time after consuming food or drink prepared by the defendants." I watched as security footage from Victoria's penthouse played on the screen. The moment I swapped the cups, Victoria unknowingly drinking what was meant for me. Ethan tensed in his seat, his hands curling into fists. Then, the prosecutor played the audio recording from that day. You said it would just make her sick. You said it wouldn't be traced. Victoria's voice, clear as day, rang through the silent courtroom. The jury was watching her now, their expressions unreadable. But she felt it. She knew what they were thinking. Her head snapped toward Ethan. For the first time, real hatred burned in her gaze. You son of a, she hissed under her breath, but her lawyer grabbed her arm, whispering something urgent. She exhaled sharply, shifting in her seat. That's when it happened. Victoria flipped. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, I have something to say. Her lawyer paled. Ethan stiffened. I was manipulated, she continued, her voice quivering just enough to sound believable. Ethan told me that it was harmless, that it would just make Evelyn too sick to attend an important work meeting. She blinked, her face twisted with rehearsed regret. I never would have agreed if I knew it was poison. I almost laughed. She was trying to save herself. The prosecutor didn't look surprised. Miss Carter, you knowingly participated in a scheme that resulted in multiple hospitalizations and nearly caused the death of your own sister-in-law. Whether you were misled or not, you played a role in this crime. Victoria opened her mouth, as if to protest, but the judge cut her off. Enough. We've heard the evidence. Ethan shot her a murderous glare. His betrayal was evident. He had expected her to go down with him, to remain silent. But she wasn't willing to sacrifice herself for him. Not anymore. The judge turned to the jury. Have you reached a verdict? A woman in the front row, the jury foreperson, stood. Yes, Your Honor. The room held its breath. For the defendant, Ethan Carter, we find him guilty on all counts. Ethan closed his eyes, his jaw locked in fury. For the defendant, Victoria Sinclair, we find her guilty of conspiracy and attempted poisoning. Victoria let out a shuddering breath, slumping slightly in her seat. She had hoped for leniency. She didn't get it. The judge's voice rang clear. Ethan Carter, you are sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Ethan's head snapped up. His mask of calm finally shattered. What? Victoria Sinclair, the judge continued, you are sentenced to 15 years with the possibility of parole after 10. Victoria let out a soft, broken sound, half sob, half disbelief. Ethan twisted in his seat, his eyes burning into her. You did this, he seethed. She ignored him, staring blankly at the table in front of her. I watched them, feeling nothing but satisfaction. The officers moved in, placing Ethan and Victoria in cuffs. As they were escorted past me, Ethan suddenly lunged forward, his eyes wild. This isn't over, Evelyn, he spat. A guard yanked him back, shoving him forward. I met his furious gaze with a cold, steady one. Oh, Ethan, I murmured, just loud enough for him to hear. It's over for you. He didn't get the last word. I did. 1 year later, I stood in the executive boardroom of Henderson & Co., the very company Victoria had once tried to steal from me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had just signed a multi-million-dollar contract, one that cemented my company's dominance in the industry. I glanced at my reflection in the sleek glass windows, remembering the woman I had been a year ago. The woman who had once trusted Ethan. The woman who had ignored the signs. The woman they had tried to destroy. She no longer existed. A soft chime from my phone pulled me back to the present. A news alert flashed across the screen. Ethan Carter and Victoria Sinclair begin their prison sentences. I didn't read the rest. I didn't need to. Instead, I picked up the coffee mug on my desk, hot, rich, completely safe. I took a slow, satisfying sip, letting the warmth spread through me. Ethan and Victoria had lost everything, their freedom, their wealth, their power. And me? I had won. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about moving forward. And never looking back. The moment my son opened his Christmas present, his tiny hands trembling with excitement, my mother smiled. But when he pulled off the wrapping paper and found nothing inside, she laughed. The sound of it, light, almost musical, sent a wave of cold fury down my spine. My 6-year-old son, Ethan, stood motionless, his small fingers still gripping the empty box as if he had somehow missed the real gift hidden inside. His brown eyes, filled with innocence and hope just seconds ago, clouded over with confusion. Then, hurt. Then, something that shattered my heart into 1,000 pieces, shame. The room fell eerily silent. My siblings and their perfect little families shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their designer outfits shimmering under the chandelier's glow. My father, Charles Whitmore, swirled his scotch lazily in his glass, refusing to meet my gaze. My mother, Eleanor, tilted her head, an amused smirk dancing at the corners of her lips. "Oh, don't look at me like that, Lauren," she said lightly, her manicured fingers adjusting the pearl necklace resting against her cashmere sweater. "He doesn't need anything, does he? Besides, it builds character." A slow, creeping rage coiled inside me. Ethan blinked rapidly, his tiny frame trembling as he tried to fight back tears. My husband, Daniel, stiffened beside me, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought he might break a tooth. I felt my own hands curl into fists beneath the table, my nails digging into my palms hard enough to leave marks. It took every ounce of restraint in my body not to lunge across the table and wipe that smug expression off my mother's face. But instead, I did something far more dangerous. I smiled. Not a warm, forgiving smile. No, this was something sharper. Colder. A silent promise. "Thank you, Mother," I said, my voice smooth, almost serene. I stood slowly, pushing my chair back with deliberate care. The weight of my son's pain settled deep into my bones, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt before. I reached down, scooped Ethan into my arms, and pressed a kiss to his forehead. "Let's go, sweetheart." Michael followed without a word, his silence carrying the same dangerous edge as mine. The room remained frozen, a sea of guilt-ridden expressions and stunned whispers. My siblings, Olivia, Charlotte, Henry, all avoided eye contact. Somewhere in the distance, the grand piano continued playing soft holiday tunes, mockingly cheerful. As I walked out of that house, into the cold winter air, I made a vow. They would pay for this. And by the time I was done, my parents, the ever-so-powerful Whitmores, would learn the hard way that when you humiliate a child, you destroy a family. 3 days earlier. Snowflakes drifted lazily past the windows of our modest colonial-style home, their delicate patterns melting as they touched the warm glass. Inside, the scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air, mingling with the comforting aroma of hot cocoa. The Christmas tree in the corner stood at a respectable 6 feet, decorated with handmade ornaments and twinkling lights that cast a soft glow over the living room. It wasn't grand, it wasn't extravagant, but it was ours. And it was filled with love. I watched as Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully tying a ribbon around a small gift box. His red sweater, his favorite one, the one he had picked out himself from Target, hung slightly loose on his tiny frame. His brown eyes shone with excitement as he held up the finished package. "Mom, do you think Grandma and Grandpa will like this?" he asked eagerly. I swallowed past the lump in my throat. Inside the box was a simple yet thoughtful gift, a handmade ornament he had painted in school, decorated with tiny gold stars. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't designer. But it was made with love. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "They'll love it." Would they? I wasn't so sure anymore. A shadow of doubt crossed Ethan's face. He hesitated, glancing toward the window, where the snow continued to fall in soft silence. "Do we have to go?" My heart clenched. For the past few months, he had been asking this question more and more. At first, I thought it was just the usual reluctance of a child not wanting to sit through an evening of boring adult conversation. But then, I started noticing things. The way my mother barely acknowledged him when we visited. The way my father only spoke to him in curt, indifferent tones. The way my siblings' children received expensive gifts, extravagant praise, and boundless affection, while Ethan got polite nods, if anything at all. At 6 years old, my son had begun to understand something no child should ever have to learn. That he was unwanted. I knelt beside him, cupping his small face in my hands. I know it's not always fun, but Christmas is about family, Ethan. And no matter what happens, Dad and I will always be there for you, okay? He nodded slowly, but the spark of excitement in his eyes had dimmed. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Daniel walked into the room, adjusting the cuffs of his navy sweater, his expression unreadable. I knew that look well. He had overheard. And he wasn't happy. We don't have to go, Lauren. His voice was low, careful. Not if it's going to hurt him. I wished it were that simple. You know how they are, I murmured. Skipping Christmas Eve dinner would only make things worse. Worse for who? I didn't say it, but we both knew the answer. For years, I had tried to keep the peace. I had swallowed their passive-aggressive remarks, endured their dismissive glances, ignored the way they looked down on my marriage, on my husband. Because, despite everything, they were still my parents. And a small, foolish part of me still held on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, one day they would change. But after this Christmas, I would finally understand. People like my parents don't change. They only break. The Whitmore estate was exactly as I remembered, grand, imposing, and utterly lifeless. The towering Victorian mansion stood like a frozen relic against the snowy landscape, its white stone walls pristine, its iron gate gleaming under the soft glow of lanterns. The moment we pulled into the driveway, I felt the weight settle on my chest. A luxury SUV was already parked in front, Olivia's, of course. My older sister had arrived early, as she always did, eager to bask in my mother's approval. From inside, I could hear the faint hum of classical music, the clinking of crystal glasses, the distant laughter of children. Ethan fidgeted in his seat, his small fingers twisting the hem of his sweater. "Are you sure Santa comes to Grandma and Grandpa's house?" he asked hesitantly. Daniel reached over, giving his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Santa goes wherever you are, buddy. And no matter what happens tonight, you have us. That's all that matters." Ethan nodded, but I could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car, adjusting my coat against the biting wind. Daniel helped Ethan out, ruffling his hair as they followed me up the grand stone steps. I hesitated for just a moment, my fingers hovering over the door handle. Then, with a steadying breath, I pushed open the heavy wooden door. Warm air enveloped us instantly, carrying the scents of roast turkey, cinnamon, and freshly baked bread. The grand foyer was as breathtaking as ever, the marble floors gleamed under the chandelier's glow, the walls adorned with paintings of ancestors who had built their fortune long before I was even born. At the center of it all stood the crown jewel of my mother's holiday decor, her 12-foot Christmas tree, decorated with Swarovski crystals and gold-trimmed ribbons, standing in perfect contrast to the warmth and simplicity of the tree in our own home. "Jenny, you finally made it," my mother's voice cut through the air, smooth and practiced, as if she were greeting a business associate rather than her own daughter. She emerged from the living room in a pristine white cashmere sweater, pearls glinting at her throat, her expression unreadable. She barely spared a glance at Ethan, offering only a fleeting brush of lips against my cheek before stepping back. "You're late." "Traffic," I lied. Her eyes flickered to Daniel. She didn't even greet him. Not that it surprised me. From the living room, the excited voices of my nieces and nephews rang out. Under the grand Christmas tree, a mountain of presents lay scattered, their colorful ribbons glinting in the soft light. Olivia's twins were already playing with the latest gaming console, Charlotte's daughter sat curled up with a brand new tablet, and Henry's son was gleefully unwrapping what looked like a premium sports gear set. Ethan took a small step closer to me. Then, as if on cue, my father's deep voice boomed from the other room. "Merry Christmas, Patricia." Patricia. Not Lauren. My father still refused to acknowledge my married name. I should have been used to it by now. Ethan stiffened beside me, his small fingers tightening around mine. I squeezed back gently. It's okay, sweetheart, I whispered. Mom and Dad are here for you. Even as I said the words, I felt the gnawing unease curl tighter in my gut. Tonight would be different. Tonight, something was going to break. And by the end of it, my parents would finally learn the cost of their cruelty. The evening unfolded with the kind of forced pleasantries and hollow conversations that had defined every family gathering at the Whitmore estate. The grand dining room was a spectacle of excess, the long mahogany table set with pristine Wedgwood china, polished silverware, and crystal goblets filled with aged wine. Candlelight flickered against the towering floral arrangements, casting soft shadows across the gleaming marble floors. Everything was perfect, meticulously arranged to maintain an illusion of elegance and superiority. But beneath the surface, the tension simmered. Ethan sat quietly beside me, his small frame barely visible against the high-backed dining chair. His cousins chattered excitedly, bragging about their expensive gifts. Olivia's twins boasted about their gaming console, Charlotte's daughter proudly displayed her new tablet, and Henry's son rattled off statistics about his top-of-the-line sports gear. No one asked Ethan what he had gotten for Christmas. No one even acknowledged his presence. My mother sat at the head of the table, watching the conversation unfold with the same satisfaction she always did, as if her carefully curated family was nothing more than a reflection of her own accomplishments. Daniel attempted to engage in small talk, discussing a recent project at work, but my father merely grunted in response before turning his attention to Henry, seamlessly shifting the conversation to stock market trends and investment strategies. It was deliberate, calculated. Daniel might as well have been invisible. I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening around my fork. Ethan, ever observant, noticed. His small fingers curled into his lap, his eyes flickering between his father and grandfather, confusion evident in his expression. The air was thick with unspoken words, each polite exchange laced with condescension. When Ethan, in an innocent attempt to contribute, began telling a story about his school project, my mother lifted a perfectly manicured hand and cut him off mid-sentence. Let's save the children's chatter for later, she said smoothly, turning back to Olivia's son, who had just begun explaining his latest achievement in competitive chess. Ethan's face fell, his cheeks flushing a deep crimson. I felt something inside me snap. But I swallowed it down. For now. As dinner drew to a close, my mother stood, signaling the beginning of the annual gift exchange. Servants carried in an array of beautifully wrapped presents, setting them beneath the massive Christmas tree in the next room. The grandchildren gathered eagerly, eyes sparkling with anticipation as my mother handed out the gifts. Olivia's children unwrapped brand-new gaming headsets and designer clothing. Charlotte's daughter received a high-end laptop, while Henry's son was given an advanced programming kit. Each child's delight was met with my mother's approving smile, her pride evident as she basked in their gratitude. Finally, she turned to Ethan, holding out a small box. He hesitated for a moment before taking it, his little hands trembling with excitement. He carefully peeled back the glossy wrapping paper, his breath hitching as he lifted the lid. And then, the excitement vanished. His fingers brushed against the bottom of the empty box, his expression shifting from anticipation to confusion. The room was silent. The warmth of the fireplace suddenly felt suffocating. And then my mother laughed. It was soft, almost amused, as if she found the entire situation endearing. "Oh, don't look so disappointed, darling," she said lightly. "He doesn't need anything, does he? Besides, it builds character." Ethan's lower lip trembled. His small fingers curled around the edge of the box as if searching for something, anything, that might have been overlooked. But there was nothing. The weight of humiliation settled over him, sinking into his small frame, crushing the innocent joy that had been there just moments before. A single tear slipped down his cheek, and my heart shattered into a million pieces. Daniel was the first to react. He pushed back his chair, the leg scraping against the polished floor, the sharp sound cutting through the silence. His hands were clenched at his sides, his breathing heavy, controlled only by sheer willpower. I could feel the anger radiating from him, thick and unrelenting. But before he could speak, I placed a hand on his arm. Not yet. I turned back to my mother, meeting her gaze with a calm so chilling it made her smirk falter. Slowly, deliberately, I rose from my seat. Without a word, I reached down and lifted Ethan into my arms, pressing a kiss to his temple. His tiny hands clung to me, his body shaking slightly as he buried his face into my shoulder. "Thank you, Mother," I said, my voice eerily steady. "You've given us exactly what we needed tonight." Her smirk returned, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Oh, I'm sure I have." I smiled. But it wasn't warm. It wasn't kind. It was the quiet kind of smile that preceded a storm. I turned on my heel and walked toward the door, Daniel following closely behind, his silence carrying the same dangerous edge as mine. The room remained frozen, a sea of guilty expressions and whispered breaths. My siblings, Olivia, Charlotte, Henry, shifted in their seats, but none of them spoke. None of them stopped us. As I stepped outside, into the cold winter air, the snow fell in soft, delicate patterns around us. Ethan sniffled against my shoulder, his small body still trembling. Daniel opened the car door, his movements stiff, controlled. As I buckled Ethan into his seat, my son looked up at me, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did I do something wrong?" The question was a knife straight through my chest. I cupped his face, brushing a tear from his cheek. "No, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong." Then I looked at Daniel, at the way his jaw was set, at the unspoken fury in his eyes. I turned back toward the Whitmore estate, the grand, perfect mansion glowing behind us like a beacon of falsehood. No, Ethan had done nothing wrong. But my parents had. And they were going to pay. The next morning, the weight of the previous night still hung in the air like a storm cloud waiting to break. The house was eerily quiet except for the faint hum of the heater, the only sound punctuating the silence. I stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, staring out the window as the early morning sun reflected off the untouched snow in our backyard. The night before had played on repeat in my mind, Ethan's crushed expression, my mother's mocking laughter, the suffocating silence that followed. A small shuffle of feet behind me broke my thoughts. Ethan stood in the doorway, his red sweater slightly askew, his eyes still carrying the remnants of last night's pain. Without a word, he climbed onto one of the kitchen stools, resting his chin on the counter. My heart clenched. "Did Santa still come?" he asked softly, his voice fragile, uncertain. Daniel, who had just stepped in, placed a gentle hand on his back. "Santa always comes, buddy." Ethan nodded but said nothing. The damage had already been done. The buzzing of my phone shattered the quiet. I reached for it, and the moment I saw the name on the screen, my stomach twisted. Olivia. I hesitated for only a second before answering. "This is unacceptable," she said the second I picked up. Her voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the undercurrent of anger beneath it. "I'm so sorry, Lauren. I should have said something last night." "I should have." "You didn't," I cut in, my tone sharper than I intended. "None of you did." A pause. Then a sigh. "We were shocked. We didn't expect." I laughed, the sound bitter. "Didn't expect what?" "That she would humiliate my son? That she would take things that far? Don't act like this is new, Olivia. She's been doing this for years." Another pause. Then, softly, "You're right." That caught me off guard. Olivia never admitted when she was wrong. "I talked to Charlotte and Henry," she continued. "We're all furious. And honestly? We've had enough." I narrowed my eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're done," she said, voice firm now. "We talked this morning, and we're cutting them off. Completely." A beat of silence passed. Then another. I leaned against the counter, gripping the phone tighter. Explain. You know they rely on us, Olivia said matter-of-factly. The investments, the property maintenance, the social connections, everything that keeps them at the top? It's all because of us. We've been the ones making sure their lives run smoothly while they act like they're still untouchable. But after last night? No more. My mind raced. She wasn't wrong. My parents lived under the illusion of wealth, but in reality, their lavish lifestyle was only sustainable because we, their children, had been propping it up. Olivia and her husband covered their medical expenses, ensuring they had access to the best doctors. Charlotte handled all their legal affairs, from estate planning to property contracts. Henry managed their investments, keeping their finances afloat despite my father's increasingly reckless spending. And me? I had been responsible for their real estate dealings, maintaining their home and ensuring they never had to deal with the tedious realities of ownership. We had given them everything. And they had still chosen to tear one of us down. They think they're untouchable, Olivia continued, her voice colder now. Let's see how well they survive without us. A slow, creeping satisfaction spread through me. For the first time in my life, I felt something close to justice. What's the plan? I asked. By the afternoon, the wheels were already in motion. Olivia's first call was to their private physician. I'm sorry, she said in a tone dripping with artificial regret. But I won't be able to continue covering their medical transportation costs. Charlotte's next call was to their property maintenance company. We won't be renewing the contract, she informed them, making sure the notice was immediate. No more landscaping, no more house repairs, no more services that kept their estate in pristine condition. Henry handled the financial side, withdrawing from their investment accounts, effectively severing their access to the discretionary funds that had allowed them to maintain appearances. And me? I made one final call, to their country club. I'd like to cancel the automatic payments, I said smoothly. Effective immediately. The woman on the other end hesitated. Mrs. Whitmore has been a valued member for years. Are you sure? I'm sure. And just like that, the world my parents had built, the carefully crafted facade of power and prestige, began to crumble. The fallout was immediate. Within 24 hours, their world started to shrink. My mother's phone calls went unanswered, her invitations to luncheons ignored. At their next church gathering, the whispers started. People who had once fought for a seat at her table suddenly kept their distance, sensing the shift in power. My father, who had spent years boasting about his financial acumen, found himself struggling to keep up with even the most basic expenses. Without Henry managing their portfolio, poor decisions led to quick and devastating losses. But the biggest blow came when their home began to deteriorate. Without maintenance, small issues became big ones. The once pristine lawn grew wild, the carefully curated rose garden withered. The heating system failed during one of the coldest weeks of winter, and for the first time in decades, my mother had to make calls to contractors herself, calls that were now met with indifference rather than urgency. They had always believed they were above consequences. That no matter how they treated us, we would always be there to support them. They were wrong. And soon, they would feel the full weight of what it meant to be abandoned. Winter had never felt so cruel inside the Whitmore estate. The once pristine mansion now bore the unmistakable signs of neglect, cracks creeping along the marble floors, dust settling in corners where no housekeeper had been to clean, and worst of all, a cold that seeped into the very bones of the house. Without the usual maintenance, the grand estate was no longer the shining beacon of old money and power. It was just another house, stripped of its illusion of invincibility. For the first time in their lives, Charles and Eleanor Whitmore were struggling. Their appointments at Greenwich Hospital had been cancelled. Without Olivia's funding, their VIP status had disappeared overnight. No more personal calls from doctors, no more priority treatments. My mother, who had once prided herself on getting same-day access to specialists that others waited months for, now sat in a crowded waiting room, clutching her designer purse as though it held the last remnants of her dignity. My father, always so composed, had received his first ever declined transaction at the country club, the membership fees suddenly overdue now that Henry had pulled their discretionary funds. The whispers had begun. They had spent decades crafting a life of prestige, carefully curating every detail to maintain their standing. But without the financial and social support of their children, their kingdom was crumbling. The Christmas invitations stopped coming. The friends who once flocked to them at charity galas now barely acknowledged them in public. My mother had tried to salvage the damage, attempting to host one of her infamous luncheons, only to be met with polite refusals and thinly veiled excuses. People could smell desperation. And nothing was more pathetic in their world than a Whitmore who had lost control. And then, just 2 weeks after Christmas, they came to me. It was early morning when the knock echoed through my home. The sound was foreign, unexpected. I wasn't used to visitors, especially not ones like them. I opened the door to find my parents standing there, stripped of their usual armor. My mother's hair, always perfectly styled, was slightly out of place, the first sign of her unraveling. My father's expensive cashmere coat looked worn, as though he had been wearing it far more frequently than before. But it was their eyes that caught me off guard, tired, weary, and for the first time, uncertain. "Lauren," my father started, his voice measured, cautious. "We need to talk." I didn't step aside immediately. For so long, they had expected me to come to them. They had expected that no matter what they did, I would always return, always seek their approval. Now, they were here, at my doorstep, looking at me as though I was their last hope. "Come in," I said finally, my tone giving nothing away. They stepped inside, my father scanning the room as if seeing my home for the first time, as if realizing that despite not having their wealth, I had built something real. Daniel sat at the dining table, watching them with unreadable eyes. Ethan was upstairs, still asleep, unaware that the very people who had humiliated him were now standing in our living room. My mother cleared her throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Lauren, we've had a difficult few weeks." I said nothing. "We've run into some challenges," my father continued, and for the first time, I saw it, the hesitation, the fragility beneath his usually unshakable demeanor. The great Charles Whitmore, struggling to admit weakness. "Challenges?" I echoed, arching an eyebrow. "You mean the hospital appointments you can't get? The country club membership you can't afford? The house falling apart without someone to maintain it?" My mother flinched, just barely. "It's not just that," she murmured, her voice quieter now. "People are talking." Ah. There it was. It wasn't just about the money, or the inconvenience. It was about the loss of status. "You mean your friends have abandoned you?" I tilted my head, my voice carefully neutral. "Now that you're no longer the Queen of Greenwich Society?" Silence. "Lauren, we know we've made mistakes," my father finally said, his tone heavier than before. "We? Mistakes?" The word came out sharper than I intended. I took a step forward, folding my arms. "You humiliated my son. On Christmas. You deliberately singled out a 6-year-old to make a point. And now that the consequences are hitting you, now you want to talk?" My mother's lips parted slightly, as if she had been expecting something different, as if she thought I would immediately soften, that I would fall back into the role of the daughter who always sought their approval. But I didn't. I saw the flicker of something on my father's face then, not just guilt, but regret. Real, painful regret. "We were wrong," he said, and this time, his voice wasn't measured or rehearsed. It was raw. We let our pride blind us to what truly mattered. My mother remained silent. Her fingers clutched the hem of her coat, a gesture that, in anyone else, would have been a sign of vulnerability. But in her? It was a sign of struggle. "We built our lives around status," my father continued. "And we forgot that none of it meant anything if we lost our family." A long silence stretched between us. Then, from the stairs, a small voice. "Grandma?" We all turned. Ethan stood at the top of the staircase, his little hands gripping the railing, his eyes still heavy with sleep. He had clearly woken up midway through the conversation, and I wondered how much he had heard. My mother stiffened. Her entire body tensed, as if she had been caught off guard. Then Ethan asked the question that shattered everything. "Why don't you like me?" The room turned to ice. My mother's breath hitched. For the first time, true, genuine pain crossed her face. Not the kind put on for show, not the kind meant to manipulate, but real, deep-rooted pain. Her voice broke. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Ethan." My son tilted his head, considering this. Then, in the simple, unburdened way that only children could, he stepped down the stairs and walked toward her. "It's okay," he said softly. "I have my red sweater. If you're cold, I can let you borrow it." And just like that, the woman who had spent her entire life holding on to power crumbled. Tears slipped past the carefully crafted walls she had built around herself, streaking down her face, smudging the perfect makeup she always wore like armor. My father placed a hand on her shoulder, his own expression heavy. "Would you give us a chance?" my father asked, his voice unsteady. I looked at Daniel, who simply nodded, trusting me to make the decision. I turned back to them. "If you want a second chance," I said, my voice steady, "there will be conditions. Because this time it wouldn't be on their terms. It would be on mine." For the first time in their lives, my parents weren't the ones dictating the rules. The power dynamic had shifted, and they knew it. My mother, who had spent years wielding control like a finely honed blade, sat frozen, her carefully curated composure slipping with each passing second. My father, once the untouchable patriarch of the Whitmore family, merely nodded, his silence a quiet admission of defeat. "Conditions?" my mother finally asked, her voice hoarse, as if the very act of speaking those words burned her throat. I leaned against the dining table, arms crossed, studying them. "Yes. If you truly want to be part of this family again, you don't just get to waltz back in when it's convenient for you. Things will be different." My mother opened her mouth, most likely to argue, but I held up a hand, stopping her. "First, there will be no more judgment. No more subtle insults, no more comparing Ethan to his cousins, no more treating Daniel like an outsider. If you can't respect my family, you have no place in it." My father nodded immediately, his expression tired but accepting. My mother hesitated, lips pressed tightly together, but after a long pause, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Second," I continued, "this relationship will not be one-sided. If you want to rebuild what you've broken, you have to put in the effort. That means showing up, not just for appearances, but because you genuinely care." My mother exhaled slowly, her hands clenching around the hem of her coat. "And what does that mean, exactly?" "It means no more grand gestures for the sake of reputation. No more charity events where you pretend to be the perfect mother and grandmother. If you want to see Ethan, you do it because you love him, not because you need to maintain an image." Something flickered in my mother's eyes. Guilt. Regret. The slow, painful realization that the world she had built was nothing more than a house of cards, and it had finally collapsed. "And finally," I said, voice steady, "you are no longer entitled to our support. Financially, socially, or otherwise. You'll stand on your own 2 feet. If you need help, you ask. But you do not expect it." My mother's head snapped up at that, her posture going rigid. That was the one thing she hadn't expected. Losing control over her children had been one thing. Losing the life of luxury she had become accustomed to? That was another entirely. "Lauren, be reasonable." "I am," I cut in sharply. "You have no idea how reasonable I'm being right now." A heavy silence settled over the room. My mother glanced at my father, as if searching for support, but he didn't argue. He just exhaled a deep breath and said, "We understand." Those 2 words sealed it. For the first time in their lives, Charles and Eleanor Whitmore had to start over. 3 months passed, and with them, the last remnants of my parents' once untouchable status. Their names no longer held weight in Greenwich's elite circles. Their invitations to high society events had long since dried up. The country club, which had once been their second home, had removed them from its membership roster. And without the silent financial backing of their children, they were forced to confront the realities of their situation. The Grand Whitmore estate, once the symbol of their power, had lost its luster. Without weekly maintenance, the once flawless garden had begun to grow wild, the perfectly manicured rose bushes now tangled with weeds. Inside, the once gleaming floors bore the scuffs of age, the grand chandelier now slightly dimmer without the meticulous upkeep of a full-time staff. The illusion of wealth had crumbled, leaving behind nothing but the bare bones of what once was. And yet, for the first time, they were learning how to live. My father, who had spent his entire life obsessing over wealth and prestige, had taken on a role as a volunteer bookkeeper at the local senior center. It wasn't paid. It wasn't glamorous. But there was something almost peaceful about the way he approached it now, his once meticulously styled hair now slightly unkempt, his designer suits replaced with more practical sweaters and slacks. My mother, once the queen of Greenwich's social scene, had been forced to step away from the world that had abandoned her. Instead of charity galas and country club luncheons, she now spent her afternoons at a small book club, a quiet gathering of women who didn't care about last names or bank accounts. For the first time, she was experiencing what it meant to have relationships not built on status, but on connection. I never knew conversations could feel this real, she had admitted once, almost reluctantly, as she helped me set the dinner table one Saturday evening. That was another change. They no longer hosted family gatherings at their mansion. Now, they came to ours. Every Saturday, without fail, they arrived, not as hosts, not as figures of power, but as family. And Ethan? He had begun to smile around them again. "Grandpa, did you see my game?" he asked excitedly one evening after his Little League practice, running up to my father with all the enthusiasm he had once reserved only for Daniel and me. My father, the same man who had once dismissed Ethan's very existence, knelt down, ruffling his hair. "Of course I did, champ. You were incredible out there." "And my mother?" She had started helping him with his homework, sitting beside him at the kitchen table, patiently working through math problems in a way that was so foreign, so different from the woman she had once been, that sometimes I wondered if this was the same person who had humiliated my son on Christmas Eve. Maybe she had changed. Or maybe she had simply learned what truly mattered. One evening, as I stood at the sink washing dishes, I caught a glimpse of them outside. Ethan was in the garden, showing my parents how to care for the plants, his tiny hands demonstrating how to loosen the soil, how to water the flowers just right. My mother, her once perfectly manicured nails now covered in dirt, listened intently. My father, who had once scoffed at anything that wasn't related to finance or power, watched with a quiet reverence. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, leaning against the counter. Daniel stepped up beside me, following my gaze. "Did you ever think we'd see this day?" I exhaled a slow breath. "No. But I think, maybe it's enough." Daniel wrapped an arm around me, pressing a kiss to my temple. Outside, Ethan laughed as my mother accidentally knocked over a watering can, her gasp of surprise followed by a genuine, uninhibited laugh of her own. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real gift this year. The box my mother had once given my son had been empty. But now, it was full. Full of lessons learned. Full of the kind of love that money could never buy.